I can ask somebody to get it for you.
We're 9 seconds late.
We are late, and I apologize for Paul making us, was it Paul that made us late? Thanks for coming. Tonight, we've got a pretty interesting agenda, really, and it's based on work that, the discussion tonight about the uptown parking policy in the historic district, and I really think it has an impact as well. In the discussion, we're going to include Southtown as well in our discussion, is Councilman Rose, I think, brought the issue to council a month or so ago in November. And with regard to the parking in general in the uptown, and so we decided we should probably take a look at it in a broader sense. And fortunately, the planning director spent thankfully, the planning director spent a lot of time putting together a great deal of information for us to take a look at and to consider. And really, one of the most fascinating things about this opportunity is we can talk about this tonight. We can take a look at these areas and get some ideas probably of things that we could improve on. But it's interesting that every time we have done a study of how much parking there is in town, it belies the frequent statement that there is no parking. And every 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, somebody from the city goes and counts all the parking spaces in town, and when you add them all up, there's a lot of places to park. It's just there's not a lot of places necessarily to park right where you want to park.
Exactly, in
But,
front of where you want to go.
so if you look at this 9-block district and you add on Southtown, and you look at the parking that's available that we don't typically recognize as being available simply because it's out of sight, it does conspire to give us a lot of places to park that we can, and many of those places we can re-examine for how they're being used, who owns them, people that have little parking places next to other people that have parking places, but they're not adjoined, or they're not signed, or they're behind buildings and they're just not, nobody knows that they're there unless you are intimately, intimately involved in, your life here in town. One of the places that I have thought about over the years is because I go to Medina Hardware frequently, that's an example of parking spaces that are behind a building that people that don't live in town or maybe live in town but don't spend much time downtown would never know that those parking spaces are there. But it's not constructed like a parking lot, it's not striped, it's not marked so that you'd know where to park, but each individual business owns some of that parking. So those are places I think that it's important for us to consider when we're looking at obstacles to close-in, readily available parking. And I think further, it's a misnomer to believe that there isn't parking because the city has this city, considering our size and the size of the uptown, the historic district, we really have done a lot about parking. When you think about the 2 parking decks that we have, I mean, a lot of communities would be happy to have 1 parking deck, and we have 2 parking decks that are close in, readily, easily recognizable when you come to town. You can find them. Most cities don't have that, so it's not like Mark. It's kind of like Mark Twain said: everybody talks about the weather but does nothing about it. In this case, the city has done quite a bit about it, particularly in the last 2 decades, to help to provide parking that's not just on-street parking. So, with that said, I'm going to ask Andrew, ask the planning director to kind of give us an overview of what he found, and with a great deal of detail, time that he spent on this, and then we will proceed to talk about it after you give us a bit of a summary. Does that make sense? Good?
Thank you. Yes, and we called it a downtown parking study because it's not a plan, it's more of an analysis of basically the current state and then provide some recommendations. So the study area was basically the historic district and adjacent parking lots on basically Elmwood Street. So the first thing we did was, we did a count. We did a total count of the inventory, and there are 1,418 total spaces in that study area. About half those are in parking lots, 39% are in garages, and 11% are on-street spaces. We also identified some areas where you could possibly add some additional on-street spaces, which is kind of a low-cost possibility to add more spots, though that was not reviewed by our city engineer or anyone with that kind of expertise. There was also an evaluation of the lots and garages, which the city owned. Most were in good or fair condition. A couple exceptions were the lot at South Elmwood and West Liberty Street, right on the corner back here. There were some repairs that it could stand to have, and Lot 5, which is on South Elmwood, is in quite poor condition at this time. So all the lots were, and the on-street spaces were surveyed, one series in January and one in December and one in January. The purpose of that was try to get a higher count month, December being the holidays where we see a lot of traffic, in January, which is kind of a lower traffic month. We did 3 days in each of those time periods and 3 times a day, 9 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. So we're trying to just get a cross-section of days and times and higher and lower times of year. So overall, 378 surveys were done, so counts of each, lot or row of parking on-street or garages. Some general observations for every count. Overall parking was available in the study area. The highest count, we only had, if you took all the spaces, we had 64% occupied, and that was actually noon on a weekday, so that was not even an evening count. And overall, lots, garages, and on-street spaces were rarely near capacity. The standard for that is 85%. If it's higher than 85%, that's an indication that there needs to be more parking because it's relatively full. So there are a number of tables and maps also in the study that you can look through, showing both December and January averages, high counts and low counts. I'm just going by the averages. In general, garages and lots east of Broadway saw low occupancy. High occupancies were on the north side of the square and in the Casanova lot in December, which is obviously because that's their high time of year. Furthermore, there's a kind of brief wayfinding survey where we identified all directional and parking signage in the downtown, which is pointing to parking, destinations, business directories, things of that nature. So overall, the city lots are pretty well signed, identifying them as city lots. However, the county and school lots were not, so it's not as clear if that's public parking or sometimes public parking or employee parking. Directional signs were present, pointing to destinations and parking, but they weren't always consistent throughout the downtown area. So based on all that analysis, we made a few recommendations, and I won't go through them all, but some of the more significant ones are to maintain current available public parking and encourage shared parking. Consider additional public parking options, particularly in the southern portion of the study area in Southtown, which have been identified for redevelopment and do not currently have public parking. Evaluate adding on-street parking spaces within and around the study area. Anticipate repairs or reconstruction of Lot 5, that's the South Elmwood lot, to bring the lot into acceptable condition and conduct necessary repairs on the Liberty Elmwood lot. And finally, consider alterations and additions to wayfinding signage to direct visitors to public parking in the downtown area. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess before we open it, before we have a bigger discussion, I guess a couple things that I found interesting about the report were particularly the idea of adding on-street parking in areas where the street is actually wide enough that we could consider putting on-street parking because of the lanes. And I don't know from the safety side, and I'm not positive about from the engineering side with truck traffic, but there are streets that come into the district that are more than 3 lanes wide enough that some portion of that, it seemed, could be added on-street parking, which is the cheapest, probably the cheapest parking that we could do, because you're just painting the lines on. And so that seemed like one of the, the top areas I thought that we could look into, and then we would need to look into it with those considerations from the engineering side, the turn lanes, turns for trucks, and from the safety side to ensure that it was a safe thing, it was a safe change to make. And the other one I think that I originally was focused on was the wayfaring signs. And in good part because of comments I've gotten from people that aren't familiar with the downtown, particularly familiar with the downtown, that I think some routes into town, you don't see a directional sign initially. And so you're not sure, if you're not familiar with the streets, and considering we have one-way streets, that in itself is confusing, I think, to people that aren't familiar. But unless you see the sign early before you get to the district, I think it's hard to figure out where to go. And depending on where you do come into town from, it makes it really difficult. The flip side of that is we don't want to have more signs than we need to have. But I think that if we looked at the streets, all the streets that feed the downtown from every direction, and just see if you went a mile out of town and then drove in, when is it that you see a sign that would direct you to a parking deck? I mean, if you're coming from the east and you're on the right street, you're probably going to you'll probably see the parking deck. But you won't see other lots, and you won't see this parking deck, depending on where you come from. So, and it's not a criticism of what we have now. It's just that if there's something we can do additionally, so that folks that aren't familiar don't come in and get confused about where to go. And as I said, with the one-way streets, I think that makes it more
Even
difficult.
harder.
And then the other thing, which I already mentioned, was I think to really try to get back together with folks that own property in the district and have parking that adjoins other people's parking. And even if we have failed, if there has been we failed to reach agreement with them in the past, I think to continue to focus on that, because that in itself, by joining some of these really obvious parking here, fenced off, parking right next door, fenced off, parking right here, fenced off, that if you open that up, it shouldn't really harm a business. It should really make everything a whole lot easier. And in some cases, some businesses are open at different hours, so that it would really be a win with no loss. So I think that's a place that really deserves, I think, more focus as we go forward.
So you're saying you want business owners that have parking available to open it up? Rather than just for their business?
Yeah, I'm not to tell anybody what to do, but I think.
No, I'm just I'm
yeah,
asking, is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
that was my point, is if you have 3 or
Everybody
4 parking lots and they're
opens their-
divided up, we've all pulled into places, I think, in other towns, or I've pulled into places here actually where I think I can drive through, but I can't drive through because there's no way to get to the other parking lot. That if you could open those up, those parking lots are already there,
I
and
see
so
what
we
you're
can
saying.
share the parking. So if your business closes at 8 o'clock, people could park there after 8 o'clock. And I just think that's a kind of a win for everybody if you can work that out. I think that's a negotiation with people that are in business, and if it works, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great for us. And then the last one, I guess, that I think we need to really look at is on Lot 5, the lot that's on South Elmwood. We have a lot that would belong to the county, and it's in really, it's not in good shape right now. If we're going to keep it as a parking lot, that's something that we probably want to take a look at and consider, doing some, clearly doing some improvements
Over by
there.
Loggerheads?
What?
Which one?
It's the one across from
Loggerheads?
Napa.
Yeah.
Across
Yeah.
from
Yeah,
Okay, I know
South
what you're
South
talking about.
Elmwood, yeah.
So
And-
for the committee, we did add lights down there.
Yeah.
There were no lights before, and we did do some patching. We were just nervous about putting too much money in, because when it was first secured, it was with the idea of future development, if somebody wanted to buy the houses along there and create like a condo cluster or whatever, it was close enough to the downtown that it would promote that sort of thing. Now, that's not to say it can't be, top coated or some work done with it. It's just, that's the balance of how much money do we want to put in if it may not be a parking lot for real long.
Sure, yeah, thank you. Councilman Rose, do you have you know, you had some suggestions too, I know that we talked about.
Right. Well, thank you, thank you. And Andrew, thank you for this fine work. I actually read it. Okay.
Oh my God, I didn't even know you could read.
Yeah, I know Sister Mary reading is very proud of me. But, and you touched on, in your recommendations, you touched on a couple of things that I've been advocating to, and that's, you know, maintain the current public and then work to extend the, you know, some parking agreements that we have. And how do I want to say, make sure that the businesses know that we do have Garfield School, because that was one of the things that brought this to mind to me when the Farmers Table people, their name escapes me right now, were saying that they've had
Stalls.
people cancel their reservation because they couldn't find parking close by. And you look at your survey here, nobody's using Garfield lot on the weekends, period.
I don't know
So
that people know it's available for
That's
parking.
my
yeah.
point, exactly. That's where, you know, if we could get some signage there to tie into what Mr. Lamb was saying, to show them that that parking is there, that's what, 2 blocks away, maximum? And
Yeah.
I'm going to say it again, you're right, we don't have a parking problem, we have a walking problem. Okay, nobody wants to walk, okay? And I think that will help us. But the one thing that drove me to request this meeting was the building of the hotel, and preceding that was the building of the Farmers Exchange, where we as a council said, Parking District 1, you don't need to provide parking, okay? And I'm not picking on you, Jim, I'm just saying, you made me think, if we continue to have more businesses come in, and we don't do something to require those businesses that, now, if we have a gift shop coming in, replacing a gift shop, we don't have a problem. But if we have a hotel coming in, replacing a gift shop, we got a problem, okay, with wherever that is, especially in the Southtown. We have all the business development, if you will, is moving towards the south end, where we have all the parking on the north end. So we've got to work something in there. My thought is to revisit the wording in that ordinance, however you want to call it, the zoning, to say, no, if your business is expected to exceed existing parking by, let's just say 10% now, I don't know, I will rely on the smart people to put that number in there. But we need to do something to make sure that we're not taking away parking spaces from the existing businesses, while at the same time providing enough service for the new business coming in so that they won't be hurt by a lack of parking. Okay, so we need to not just let people have a carte blanche, oh, I'm building a new business, I don't have to worry about parking. We do have to. And that's what I would like to see, the rewording in this, so that we can protect those who are here and also allow the new businesses coming in to have adequate parking. Now, I know in Southtown, there's a lot of flat spots out there, but is it going to continue to be the old grocery store down there, or is somebody going to take that and put in like a living complex or something, as the comprehensive plan suggested may happen? Or if, another building, the buildings there, the Master Kim's, for example, if that's repurposed to something else, that's going to put a little crimp on the parking. So we need to make sure that when that comes in, the new business has some sort of arrangement, whether it's providing a shuttle service to the parking decks up here, taking, I don't know, whatever it would be, and adding 10 parking places to their property, something, so that the patrons will have a place to park. And the existing businesses will be able to say, okay, you didn't hurt us. That's all I'm saying. We need to tighten the wording on it a little bit, instead of leaving it so wide-based. That's all.
Thank you, Councilman. Appreciate all those good ideas. Just two things before I go to you, Jess. Good points that Councilman Rose brought up is the comprehensive plan, because the comprehensive plan does foresee certain development, particularly in Southtown, in the area that Paul mentioned, like where the Restore is. So if you consider the size of that parking lot and you took a chunk of that parking lot away and it was developed into condominiums or housing, that would, that would eat up what is currently, what is available parking. And the second thing, which is the one thing I think we can never get a handle on, you mentioned as well, Paul, and that is walking. I was
Yes.
talking to the planning director earlier about how is it that you actually get people to walk?
Wow.
Because a lot of the comments about there not being any parking is simply there's no parking exactly where I want to go, because we don't seem to be a culture, culturally, it seems like we do walk if we want to exercise, but we don't seem willing to actually walk for other reasons. What? Is that a sexist comment?
He is speaking from experience, maybe. Maybe it's not sexist. Am I right, Jeff? Just saying.
Anyway, it is interesting, and I don't know and it's something I don't know how you would ever rope that in, or improve on that, but it is that we do not like, we as a society don't seem to like to walk. We do like to just be, close to where we park, and in of that one thing really is a huge contributor to the idea that we don't have enough parking. But I think Councilman Rose, raised a number of interesting issues which pertain specifically to development. That we have to consider the areas we're talking about that can be developed and could be developed differently, and could be could attract more cars to park. And we need to be aware of that as we do our thinking now in our future planning. So, thanks, Councilman. Councilman Hazelton?
I'm sorry, what?
Councilwoman Hazeltine?
Thank you, sir.
Sexist statements just abounding here.
I know. Bill Lamb. Anyway, I have said this since the Farmers Exchange building, they began work on it. And, now that I'm thinking about it, and Pat and Nino, I don't know if they're still hanging around, or maybe Andrew, you know the answer to this question, or the mayor even. West Smith Road, is that repair going to include sidewalks? Because before they started the repair, there were no sidewalks. So like me walking from Blake Avenue, from my house, to get to like Loggerhead's Tap House, there's no sidewalk on portions of it. And I noticed in the majority of Southtown and the area where the Farmers Exchange is, there are a lot of sections where it's not necessarily walkable. There's no path laid out, there's no sidewalk, there's nothing indicating like, hey, you can walk right here. I'm from Cuyahoga Falls, so we call it the Devil Strip, but the tree lawn type area, is what people will walk in, or what I would walk in when I would walk to the tap house. But has anybody thought about wayfinding or designating just that area, the ways that you can walk to make it more walkable? Because people look at it and they're like, well, you can't just walk across the tracks right there. Well, you can. Yes, you can, but it doesn't look very inviting or friendly, like, hey, walk across me to get to where you're going. That whole area right there is just intimidating as a pedestrian to try to walk around, because it's not very, am I making up words, navigatable? It's not easy to navigate. So like even when doing like the Champion Creek cleanup, I've noticed like there's parts you can walk, there's parts that are very obvious, you can walk there, and then there's parts where, yeah, you could walk there if you wanted to, but are you supposed to? I don't know. But if we made those more obvious or marked them, then that might be an easy solution as well. But I have always felt from the very start that that area that was developed for Southtown is not very walkable to me. I mean, Kimberly said, I walk it all the time. I walk it, she actually said I walk it in heels. So, other people might not think that it's, not walkable, but I do think there are things that could be improved to let people know, hey, you can walk here, just because there's not an actual sidewalk. This is the path to get from point A to point B, if that makes sense. Any of that.
I think Main Street Medina's here, and I think that's one of the areas that Main Street's worked on year after year for a while. I
Yeah.
think ever since Southtown is exactly that idea
To try to make it look nicer.
Well, I think part of it was aesthetically to show that these, when you walk from the historic district across
Mm-hmm.
the street, that aesthetically there's some differentiation there, and you want to go there. So, talked about arches or other things that have been talked about. And I think Main Street really took the lead on that.
Even public
Directions
art.
throughout Southtown I think as it develops, I think all those things will clearly come to pass, because it'll be, with the advent of the restoration of the Farmers Exchange building, with the new hotel, the number of people, I think those things just will, naturally will come about. And because I think it's already, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we've had these discussions, and I think it's already pretty much in the cooker, and it's going to happen.
What's
So,
going to happen?
Well, I
what
think that
exactly?
aesthetically, to attract people to go across the railroad tracks.
Yes.
Directionally, to get people across. I think that's where a good part of our parking discussion is, as Councilman Rose mentioned, and we talked about the necessity of making sure people know that there is parking available to get to Southtown, and then to work on the areas in Southtown where we can improve on what parking that already exists so that it's more accessible to people. And then the aesthetic, so that people, when they are in the historic district, they know that there's something else there. It's, Southtown is there. It's a new entity unto itself. So, I think that that is already in the plan, I think, to get those things done. Main Street, I think, playing a key role, I think, in getting those things
So-
promoted, and that they will happen, sure.
Sorry. So, follow along with me for a minute, if you will. The vibe of Southtown is supposed to be different than the historic district, correct? Supposed
is.
to be more contemporary, upscale, artsy, that type of deal. How far into Southtown does the historically regulated buildings, those 9 blocks, go?
It ends at Smith Road. It is the 9 blocks, so it's Smith Road.
Okay.
It's the back of the 9 blocks. So when we talk about the district frequently, I think people visually see the downtown with the square.
Yes.
But it is the back of the, square. So if you go Elmwood is the back of the south side. So that's because it's the back of this block.
Gotcha.
And City Hall is not in the district because it's that block.
Yeah.
So if you do that, behind Garfield is in the district, but Smith Road on the south side is not the historic district. So the historic district regulations are the 9-block area. Southtown the intention is to develop that, as you said, as a more kind of contemporary arts, restaurants and a district like that. And that probably will eventually necessitate some changes in the code in order to allow things that we
Yes.
don't allow in the district.
So that would be my question, and obviously this plays into my personal interests, and I know that there are also, George's interests too. Why couldn't we come up with a way, since there isn't the same rules on, I'm talking public art, so try to follow along here. You can't do public art on a historical building, you can't alter the face of it. But if we're outside of the historical district, we want to have public art to show that this is a different vibe, this is a different area of the city. Why can't we use that as not only a beacon to draw people that way, but big enough to let people know, yes, there is something else down here and there's parking down here? I mean, incorporate that into it. I just think that would be an inexpensive, fun way to do it. I know all this other stuff is necessary, but just throwing it out there from the mind of Jess, if that's the vibe we're trying to create, that might be a good way to sort of shine a beacon on that part of Southtown and make it look more inviting and tell people, hey, there's parking down here too.
All right. Well, I think we're going to just jump back to just the parking right at the moment. All those things matter and are important, but that I think we will work on. But I do want to see Councilman Harris here, Councilwoman, excuse me.
Thank you.
Apologize for that.
You
I don't know if
apologize
you
to
had
me.
some comments.
So, a couple. I'm not unlike a lot of other people that have come through the city of Medina, including family and friends. I've lived here for a long time. I certainly am not opposed to walking because I do it all the time. In fact, we just had this conversation about my 5-mile path, which includes Smith Road. But I didn't realize we had as much parking as we have either. So I think by communicating that to not only the residents of the city, but for those people that come to visit our city, that's going to make a big difference.
Via signage?
Something that's attractive, but that points the way.
Yeah. We do have a sign maker, for those who don't know. The city does have its own sign maker, so we have the capability to make whatever
And-
signs we would like.
And how expensive is that?
Well, it's in-house, it's us doing it, so
Yeah.
much cheaper than it
Yeah.
could possibly be.
And I think if we can communicate that, we're going to hear a whole lot less comments about, well, you know, I didn't know where to park, so I kept going, which I've actually heard from some of my friends who live outside the city.
Are there like little, you are here? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but if you're driving, you don't.
Yeah, you can't see it. I'm just thinking.
Were you
Yeah, I'm done.
good? Okay, thanks.
This is always a question.
If someone, we'd love to hear from you, anybody, any comments that anybody has too. Do you want to go back, are we going to go back to the microphone?
Well, you have to have
We
a
ha-
microphone.
Yeah, we have to have a microphone, so,
Can I start, Bill?
oh, I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't see you over there.
That's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're one of the only communities with free parking. And we take pride in that. We're also one of the only communities that collaborate very well. We've got being the county seat, we have the county offices, we have the school, we have the courts. So all of those things just bolster, you know, the number of available parking. We did hear, after we built the new deck, that, you know, people from around here knew it was available for public parking, but people coming from the outside didn't know, or if they did know that they could park there, they didn't know for how long, or, you know, was it something they had to pay for? So as a result of that, we made those two signs that say free public parking, and then that worked so well for this that we also put them over at the county deck too, just because that's the first one they see coming in from the interstate. And those were made by the city, which is inexpensive, but there's a difference between those type signs, white with green lettering, or white with black lettering, like the parking signs or speed limit signs that we can make ourselves, than the wayfinding signs, because that's a special color and a special ink and all of that. So those we generally do with a local sign provider, just for the consistency of them all looking the same. But I do think signage would help. I did walk away for a second, but neither Patrick nor Nino's out running around on a couple other tasks, and I couldn't locate Patrick. He must still be here because his light's on. But Nino confirmed that the West Smith Road project will have sidewalks on both sides. They had to get some extra right-of-way to make that happen, but it will have brand-new sidewalks
That'll
on
help a
both
lot.
sides. Pardon me?
I
Yes.
said that will help a lot.
Right. And then all of the infrastructure that's going in there, so that'll be beneficial. And just another thing from a traffic or a safety director position is, some people don't realize that whether it's a signalized intersection or not, every cross street is a crosswalk, marked or not. So whether it's a lighted intersection, for example, Elmwood and Smith, things like that, the pedestrians have the right-of-way to cross adjacent to each of those streets, and the traveling public has a duty to yield to them, even if there's not a crosswalk or a cross signal. The problem is, and I don't want to mislead people, the problem is, even in areas where we have signalized cross and crosswalks and flashing lights, we're still having trouble getting people to yield to the pedestrians in them. And the problem with trying to enforce that is, if you have a police officer in a car sitting there watching for such violations, to try to get them out into traffic to catch that person that didn't yield is problematic in and of itself. In fact, back when I was on the other side of the wall there, we even tried it with bike officers to radio to patrol officers to get them stopped. But the volume of the traffic in and around the square, we're talking about a traffic violation versus putting people at risk of trying to chase these people down.
Yeah.
So you have to balance those interests, so I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. I think just reinforces the city has done a lot. I mean, the city is not ignored any of these issues, I think, and has worked decade after decade really to make improvements, including what you were talking about safety. I mean, a lot of work has gone into that. I think that we can be happy that we have, the administration continuing to work on it.
Jim did want to talk too.
Okay, I think you wanted to go first? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. You have to go to the microphone though in the back, just so we can hear you.
Do they need to do their name and address? I don't know.
Well, and your name and address, please.
My name's Megan Harbath. My address is 30749 West Landerwood Road, Pepper Pike. As a mom of a college senior who has traveled all over the U.S. looking for colleges this year, the thought occurred to me that when I'm looking for parking or even looking to go somewhere, I use digital wayfaring, not necessarily local signage. So during the meeting, I pulled up Medina parking. There were 10 to 12 items. I didn't bring my phone back, but they say like Medina parking, Medina public parking lot, lot 4. I'm pretty much a lifer in Medina, other than the last couple of years. I don't know where most of these lots are. If there's a way that we could come up of better naming of the parking lots, colors, letters, and on marketing activity with the city or even Main Street Medina, suggest lots where someone that's coming from outside of our immediate community can drive their car literally to parking lot A, or the blue parking lot, or the green parking lot. Just a thought I had based on my recent experience looking for parking lots over the last year. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great suggestion because most everybody's just digitally looking for everything they're
Puts
looking
it in
for while
there.
they're driving. It's in your phone, but the fact that you don't know where those lots are is one thing we could address that would be great, because
says
then
an address.
it doesn't require us to put up more signs. And nobody wants really more, we don't really want to have a whole lot more signs. We just want to improve that. So thank you, that's a great suggestion. Jim, you were next, I think.
I'm looking at this and it's giving addresses of where the parking lots are.
Paul, I'm really happy to hear that I inspired you to greater heights here with the parking. And
Thanks, Jim.
and along with you, I have also been spending time on parking since it was a major hurdle in our discussions with the hotel. So a lot of thoughts occurred to me while going through that process, and I wanted to relate them to some of the suggestions that have been made. I want to start with the idea that the lady before me spoke about. That was something that occurred to me as well, that finding parking space, unless you're a native like myself who always knows where there's a parking space, is a challenge, and it's a challenge that can only be met particularly if we're trying to attract people to this town who aren't familiar with it, is a wayfinding. But digitally, why don't we have on our entry roads coming in here, 57, 42, 3, 18, et cetera, signs indicating on them, there's a website or whatever referring them to parking availability with maps. I know that's an old-fashioned suggestion, but actually maps on those website that would show where parking is available, so that folks would at least know where the public parking is and have a map that would point out where those are and have some sort of indicator on every one of these wayfinding or parking signs around town that would lead them to a website that would in fact show folks where parking is. I suspect that could be taken even further with a little more cost digitally, cameras or so forth showing which of those spots were available or parking was most likely, but that may be taking it further than we want to go at this point. But I think at least initially showing where our parking is would be just a huge step for folks coming into a town, and having that on all of our signage, making that reference to that website. Secondly, as Councilman Lamb indicated, there is a lot of parking behind that's hidden, that's essentially private, but there is no program that I know of that incentivizes those landlords to work together to make that parking both more functional and visible. And I think perhaps it wouldn't be that difficult to provide a program with the cooperation of the city and in Main Street here that would get those landlords together and perhaps provide design assistance in laying out their parking lots in a more functional manner in return for those private property owners allowing public access to that parking. And perhaps that can be taken even a step further in offering services for upgrading those parking lots, other maybe monetary incentives or tax incentives to improve those parking, stripe that parking so that when you get there, you can actually see where there are spaces available. But that would have to be in return for providing public access to those parking spaces. And I think many of the landlords, at least those who understand business, would be very interested in participating, because the more that you allow parking close to their facilities, the more likely those folks are to buy from those facilities. So there's a benefit and a tax benefit to the city as well. I have advocated for many years that we also need to have sidewalks that are walkable year-around. So instead of bringing your snow boots with spikes to get over the mounds of snow shoveled over from the neighbor's parking lot, instead of having to hike over there, that we ought to have a program for cleaning all of the sidewalks off, and perhaps even the parking lots, but certainly the sidewalks, so that we truly are a walkable city 12 months of the year and not just 9 months of the year. Some of our sidewalks are just literally impossible to get through when we get a heavy snowfall. And some landlords and some tenants are more neglectful than others in taking care of those walks. There's no reason why we can't do like Wadsworth does, even though they do it on a voluntary basis, of doing a cooperative where they have a private contractor which is paid for by those merchants within that district. And those private contractors pile the snow where the city tells them, and the city hauls it off to a space where it can be allowed to disappear like our glaciers. So I think that is a program that ought to be looked at, with Wadsworth being a good example, where 85% of their merchants participate in that program to pay that private contractor. I think it could also be done, and even better done, with a SID. There is no reason that, again, the folks in those districts, the historic district in particular, wouldn't participate in a SID that would provide services like snow removal, window cleaning, and any other thing, much like a mall operates. Clean streets, clean sidewalks, clean windows, that are shared in costs and done at a cheaper rate than can be done individually because it's done collectively. I think that's something that, again, we ought to try to facilitate. I have advocated for a long time here too that you aren't going to solve the walking problem, you aren't going to change human behavior, at least most of our behavior is pretty well ingrained, particularly for old guys like me. You get into a habit, and it's not going to change simply because there's parking spaces available. I'm not going to walk a quarter of a mile. And my wife, in particular, in heels, is not going to walk a quarter of a mile. Oh, she'll do that shopping with no problem typically. But going to a restaurant or going to a store, it's a little more of a challenge. So again, I think a SID is an opportunity to provide a couple of other services. I happen to spend a lot of time in Naples in the winter time. Of course, not much snow down there, but they have a similar parking problem. There isn't any down there. They have parking garages too, but parking is really scarce, at least for me, an outsider. And what they have is valet service. And valet is the way this uptown needs to go. It needs valet service. And there is no reason it wouldn't be affordable service to get people to stop at 4, 5, 6, or 7 valet stations in and around the square to be chosen by the merchants and drop their car off and be able to walk maybe 50 feet or 500 feet instead of a quarter of a mile to get to their restaurant or get to their store. And that valet service can be paid for through validation by the merchants who participate in it. And there's other ways to cover that cost as well. And a shuttle service. Why don't we have an uptown shuttle? We have a county with a bus service. No reason we can't have a city with a shuttle service and get us around all over this community, because you are not going to find people walking from the north side of the square all the way down to the south town. It's too far for most folks. But a shuttle service that drops off at specific areas, continuously running, I think they would participate in. And again, not an expensive service. One that we've provided at Forest Meadows Villas for 15 years or more. There's a reasonable cost, and it's even more reasonable if it's shared by the entire uptown area. It's not something that can't be handled. In fact, I do hope to initiate a shuttle for the hotel, because I know that folks are going to want to visit places like Industrial Social and the Root Company. They aren't going to walk out there. And we don't want them parking and reparking, because that just creates more parking problems. So why not have a shuttle? They park once, the rest of the day, the rest of the time they're there, there's a shuttle available to get them to multiple places throughout our town. Places that they want to go, the Phillips House, the AI Root. All these are tourist attractions that people want to go to, don't know how to get there perhaps, and don't want to be jumping in their car and hunting for parking each time they've got to do it. So why not provide a shuttle service? Again, something that can be supported and paid for by the folks who benefit from it, the merchants, the restaurants, and so forth, I think would all offer validation and help in support of those kinds of things. So I think rather than trying to create additional parking or put the burden of creating parking on folks coming in here, all you'll do is discourage retail or other stores from coming in here by saying, well, I'm sorry, you got to have 33 parking spaces or 40 parking spaces. Because not only is it expensive, certainly you know that from your own experience with a parking garage, how expensive that is. Plus, parking rarely ever pays for itself, particularly if we're only getting 50% usage. So you need to instead provide walking services, transportation services that get these people where they want to go, instead of creating a parking lot like we have in the suburbs. We have shopping centers out there with acres of parking causing nothing but water runoff problems, trash flying around, and unuse. They're rarely, ever fully utilized. And now you want to do that up here? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything you want to tear down in this town to replace it with asphalt. What you have to do is take advantage of the parking you do have and get people there back and forth by providing means to do that. And I guarantee you, you're not only going to discourage development uptown if you require adequate parking for their use, you're going to eliminate development uptown. You need to encourage development here, and you need to encourage it by providing those kind of services that will move people where they want to go without creating banks of empty parking around for someone's convenience. So I think those are all areas that you ought to be incorporating in your plan here by getting the merchants involved in helping participate the landlords, getting the landlords involved. If they'd like to see the value of their buildings continue to move up, they need to make sure that their merchants are benefiting by traffic. If we want the merchants to benefit from traffic, we have to increase traffic. And we increase traffic by making it convenient for those customers, tourists, and so forth to come here and to not fight parking, but to enjoy the benefits of shuttle services and valet and wayfinding to find out where they can park initially. So my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. We are, I always think we're fortunate to have you here because you have you have a great knowledge and a lot of great ideas. I got about 3 of them written down, I think, completely, but we'll want to talk about some of those things, after, when we get together and start to retake, Councilman Rose and I have a couple things we want to do that will become, that are, we'll have to go to council to be voted on. So we'll want to talk to you and anyone else who has, anybody else who has something to add to all of this, because they're all good ideas. And I think that's the real, we really do benefit from these discussions because we hear things that we don't, we want to get that kind of input, whatever the topic is. So I really appreciate the time you took to give us this information. Yes, you are very welcome.
Anybody else?
Yeah, did you want to go next? No.
Well,
Did anybody else want to?
George, do you want to say? Yeah. Okay.
George? You can go after.
Well, yeah, we'll let the public speak.
I'm George Sam, 402 East Washington Street, Medina, also Main Street Medina Executive Director. Just wanted to offer to the city, we're used to partnering with the city and the county and our other agencies, and we have committees of people from the public like Jim, that property owners, business owners that come to our meetings all the time and offer these suggestions all the time. What we're lacking is something that Andrew provided for us today, was a little expertise on how to solve these issues. And one of the things that Main Street Medina is working on is we're in the process of going through our final 2 interviews to have a design plan done for Southtown. As Councilman Lamb alluded to before, we've been working since 2018 on a plan for Southtown. And one of the things that came out of the public input meetings was a vision for Southtown, solutions for issues. And the biggest one was it's a more traffic-oriented than pedestrian-oriented environment to begin with. So solving that professionally would help us. So hopefully when we get this interview process done, we'll have hired an agency that will come and help us work through the design parts of these things we're talking about. We can all, have suggestions, but having somebody with the knowledge to come in and show us what is possible, I think, is the answer. So we're offering that to the city. our proposal hopefully will include you, and we'll have public input meetings in the next couple months just to kind of field all these suggestions, and then we would offer to you a proposal, a design plan for Southtown. I do know that there's other grants in the works as well that will address wayfinding signage, streetscape improvements to make both the historic district and Southtown more pedestrian friendly. So with those things said, we're offering solutions. We want to be part of the mix, and this stuff is moving forward. We'll just chip away at it one step at a time, and I'll just keep you posted on the next set of meetings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Main Street is such a critical part of, what's been able to be done in the city, the contribution, across the board downtown and in Southtown. And I think one of the most exciting things, is to see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, what we have in Southtown, how we've taken that area that was somewhat of a under the radar zone and made it into something that's productive and brings tax money in, is a lot of joy and fun for people that live here. Business, right? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Did anybody else want to talk tonight? Say something tonight? Are you good? Are you sure? Okay.
Did you speak for her, George?
Nobody speaks for Angela.
Jared?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Lamb. I was just going to point out, on the city's website, on our residence page, we do have a map. I'll pop that up on the screen here for you. That will show where parking is throughout the city. So that is something I can look if council wishes to maybe move that somewhere else on the site to make it a little more prominent. If people want to find their places to park. But it does exist. You can find it on our Find It Now app at the top of the web page, or go to the residence page and it says parking. Just click that button and it'll take you to the map.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Okay.
Angela's like, oh, right now I have something to say. I just wanted to know if Jared knows, while Angela's hustling back there, how, I pulled it up after Megan said that on the Google Maps to see where it said the parking. Where do they pull that information from that it's public parking?
Yes. Barbara can help correct me if I'm wrong, but I know we populated the color coding section you see there. We just used the Google Map.
No. Like, when I go on my phone and I press the little maps icon, sorry, Angela, you got back there and I just kept talking. It's shocking, I know. I clicked on my little maps icon and I just put in public parking and it said search nearby. And then it came up with a bunch of different places and it just said public parking, and it gave the addresses.
And that's through Google, you're saying?
Yeah.
They do wonderful things when they drive by in those cars around the different areas of the city.
Well, that's why I'm
It's
wondering,
amazing
like,
what they capture,
how is
but
that?
Andrew could probably answer that better.
Yeah, and actually, you can make suggestions on Google Maps, and they review it and accept it or deny it. Usually they accept it, so I go in there rather frequently and try to update it.
Oh,
But anybody can do it, and if they accept it, it goes on Google Maps.
nice. Good to know. Thank you. Sorry, Angela, go ahead.
Angela Mancier, 149 Essex Lane. The one thing I just wanted to point out, we've really, in our committee meetings when we're talking about the big events that we do, a good portion of it is we do talk about parking, or where are these people, we're trying to bring all these people in, we're marketing all over the different counties in Ohio, so what do we do when we get them here? And so parking is definitely something that we address, and over the last year, George and I have tried, when an event is coming up, there's an information page, we often have frequently asked questions about that event. George has done a great job visually providing maps and kind of highlighting, since our event is over here, I would suggest parking here. So that's something that we continue to do. And again, those maps are great. And then in a meeting with the police department, they offered that anytime we had a map for an upcoming event, because sometimes people do go to their social media as well, they will post any of our maps. So between that, and then also for Southtown Music Fest as a good example, wanting to maybe down the road offering shuttling from, Ella Canavan or from Garfield or from Blake, people who are coming from those parts of the state could park there and not come and drive into Southtown. So it could be more pedestrian friendly when we are hoping to attract a lot of people. So it's on our radar for sure. We feel responsible. We're bringing all these people into town. So we're trying to educate them before they even get here, so they'll have a good understanding of, yes, we have free parking, here's where you can go, you're a block away. And then people kind of, can follow those directions. But those are always on our websites and social media.
Great, thanks. Appreciate all that good information, all the work that you do. Was there anybody else? Councilman Shields, did you want? I just got here late. Yeah, okay. No one else? Did you, Paul, you had something?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, I just wanted to make one thing clear. I was not advocating tearing anything down and covering it with asphalt. I was just saying, point I was trying to make was when the new business moves in, if they're going to require more parking, they've got to do something like make an arrangement with the schools so they can use X number of parking places, so that how do I want to say, the current parking situation wouldn't be harmed, okay? That there would be, we're using the same parking spaces, but the business would be able to say that, during dining hours, we'll have a valet service or a shuttle service going back and forth to one of the parking decks, or something like that. Okay, that's where I was going with it. Or arrange for existing parking to be part of their parking that isn't generally open to the public. Okay, say for example, let's use behind the hardware store. Okay, Rick will say, okay, these are my spaces 9 to 5 or whatever he's open. But to one of the restaurants, I'll rent you 5 spaces from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. or something like that, that the business would be able to use his private spaces, which I think was touched on here in one way, shape, or form already during this conversation. But I just want to make it clear, I'm not saying tear down another building, okay? Well, that's why we have an economic development director here to work with them on that. That's why we have Main Street Medina to work with them on that, okay? I realize it's going to be an uphill battle, but I do believe that if a business wants to be here, and I know there's a lot of businesses who do want to be here, and when we do a survey after a new business comes in and the new business is up and running, they are overwhelmed and very grateful for the work that we do to help get a business in here. And I don't see that changing one iota. Okay, so there's going to have to be some negotiations. We're not going to pretend like we're people in Washington. We will negotiate. And we will work with, city business, may have 2 businesses working together. Some people are going to say yes, some people are going to say no. We know that. But we're not going to require somebody to tear down a building or whatever to make sure they have 33 parking places when they only have 7. Okay, we'll work with them on that. All right? That's why I want to have the wording in this ordinance that we passed in 19 adjusted to reflect those types of things. And that's the impetus for this meeting here. And thank you for making me think about that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's about all we're going to cover tonight. Andrew, Planning Director, really appreciate all the work you put into this. It's a great place for us to start. It gives us all the information that we need, a lot of detail. All your comments were helpful. Appreciate all that input and consideration, and we're going to continue to take a look at it and see what, amongst all of the things we talked about tonight, what things we think would be, reasonable and helpful to, to pursue. So I really appreciate everybody coming and contributing to the meeting. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.